Hi, I'm Dr. Patrick Kingsep here. Did you know that we can spend on average 2.1 hours a week in conflict and even more time doing what we can to avoid conflict or confrontation? However, you can handle conflict without going into panic mode. Yes, it may be uncomfortable. Now in this video, we're going to have a listen to Jordan Peterson discussing his important points on this topic. All the way through, I pop in and out with my thoughts, my interpretations, and even at times my further explanations. Based on what Dr. Peterson says, at the end of his discussion, I give you my take on how to become conflict competent. In other words, to become a non-judgmental, thoughtful, and insightful listener. Now, let's get listening.
One of the things you see when you're talking to people and they're trying to solve problems is that they're afraid to face the problem. And so then their anxiety is working against them, and you can think about it as antagonistic to rationality. But then I could say, well, why don't you think for a while about what your life would be like if you didn't face this problem? Because if you think that through, if you have a problem and you really think through what the consequences are going to be in 3 to 5 years of not facing it, then you're going to get more afraid of not facing it than facing it. And that's great, because then your anxiety, instead of standing in front of you, instead of you having a dragon that's guarding the path in front of you, you have one chasing you down the path from behind. That's a lot more useful. And so that's just a minimal example of the utility of getting your emotions and your thoughts aligned the same way.
Avoiding something once is not a big deal. Even avoiding it 10 times is unlikely to affect your life too much. But over time and with enough repetition, this habit worsens your anxiety through a process called avoidance conditioning. The concept of avoidance conditioning is this: the more you keep your anxiety in check by avoiding something, the more likely you are to keep kind of avoiding it. This is true no matter how important that thing might be for you and your life.
The same thing happens with aggression. One of the most common reasons that people come and seek psychotherapy really is because they're too agreeable. But what that means is they're not assertive enough. They haven't integrated their capacity for aggression, and so other people can push them around. And they're very conflict avoidant. And so the consequences of that across time is that you don't stand up for yourself well enough, and you get taken advantage of, and that spirals badly downward.
The conflict avoidance is a type of people-pleasing behavior that typically arises from a deep-rooted fear of upsetting others. Now, many of these tendencies can be traced back to growing up in an environment that was either dismissive or even, I don't know, hypercritical. So people who respond to conflict this way often expect negative outcomes and find it difficult to trust the other person's reaction. In other words, asserting your opinion can seem scary or even unnerving. You prefer to be seen as the nice person at work, for example, or you may shy away from open, healthy conflict so as not to rock the boat. In a relationship, this can look like going silent on your partner, changing the subject, or enduring uncomfortable situations instead of expressing issues openly.
And so partly what you do when you're doing assertiveness training with people is you find out what they're angry about. And they're usually angry if they're not assertive enough because other people are taking advantage of them, or you could say because they're not putting their own necessities forward with enough force. It's hard to distinguish between those two things. You get them to talk about what they're angry about. That often makes them cry, often many times. And then you get them to kind of envision what they would want to have instead, which they're often afraid to do because people are afraid to think about what they want, because that makes it more clear when they're not getting it, and that's painful, right? Or maybe they're afraid of hoping, so they won't specify a clear aim. But anyways, you get them to think about what they might want instead. You get them to think about the costs of not pursuing that, and then you help them develop strategies for integrating their aggression and with their thinking so that they can come up with a plan to approach the world in a more confident way. So for example, someone might come to me and say, I'm being bullied badly at work. And so then I'll say, well, what are your options? Do you have to put up with it? Well, we'll figure that out, because maybe you do. Maybe you don't have options. But here's how to find out. Get your damn CV together so it's pristine, right? It's ready to go. Get over your fear of a new interview, because people are generally afraid of that. Get over your fear of applying for a new job. Start thinking about what it would mean to have a different job. Start thinking about what it would mean to have a better job even, because maybe your fear is just making you stuck here.
I just wanted to jump in and say that I've realized that one of the only ways to get unstuck is to detach yourself from the outcome of our decisions and the fears about the things not working out, and instead focus solely on what exactly we want as well as what we need. In this way, the uncertainty can lead to opportunity. It has become more and more clear that the decisions you can make from now on need to be based on your true desires and not your fears. We tend to keep ourselves in these unhealthy situations mainly because we just don't have the tools to help ourselves. Now, when you're having trouble getting unstuck, you can use some of the small actions which I detail at the end of this video. These can be helpful in creating space to move through and out of the undesirable situation.
But I can tell you one thing, if someone's picking on you at work and you don't have options, you lose. So you get the person to start building a strategy. It's like, okay, if you're going to tell this person to stop, you have to know how to make them stop. And the one thing you need for sure is an option. If you don't have an option, then maybe we start thinking about the fact that you need some more training or something like that, because you cannot negotiate if you don't have any power, especially if you're dealing with someone who's really out to get you or really disagreeable. If you don't have a leg to stand on, they'll just push you over, and maybe they'll jump on you too, because that's what they're like and they enjoy it anyways. So it's no joke. So you put your options behind you and then you start to think about strategy. So I tell people, look, if you're being harassed at work, you document it every time it happens and you write it down. So you've got like 20 stories about it and it's fully documented. And then you go confront the person at some point, but with at least 3 pieces of evidence. And you have some sense of what you tell them about what will happen if they don't stop. So you have to figure out, well, if they don't stop, what are you going to do about it? Leave? Not if you can't leave. So you have to be able to wield a big stick and speak softly. But you see, that's how you take your aggression, which is an absolutely necessary part of your psyche, and manifest it up into a sophisticated means of dealing with the world.
I just thought I would throw in this interesting bit of trivia. On September 2nd, 1901, United States Vice President Theodore Roosevelt outlined his ideal foreign policy in a speech at the Minnesota State Fair in Falcon Heights, Minnesota. Speak softly and carry a big stick. The idea is negotiating peacefully, but also having strength in case things go wrong. This is where I believe wield a big stick and speak softly that Dr. Jordan Peterson refers to comes from.
You don't just suppress it. You say, well, I should be able to put up with it. Or I wish I wasn't so angry or something. Forget that. That's all that'll happen is your blood pressure will stay high and you'll die of a heart attack, because anger, for example, is a very toxic emotion. And it does cause heart damage over time.
Now, studies have shown that people who are angry more frequently and more intensely are at higher risk for a heart disease event, including heart attacks and the silent heart attack, as well as bypass surgery. They are also more likely to die suddenly from a heart-related event.
It's the only emotion that we really know that's been linked to things like cardiovascular risk. And anger is toxic because it's like you're driving a car, you're stepping on the gas and pushing on the brake at the same time, because anger tells you to run away and to attack at the same time, because you don't know what's going to happen. And so it really amps up the physiological demand on your body, including your heart and your musculature. So if you stay like that for like 10 years, you're going to age 20 years. And that's a bad plan. So, you know, you take your underground emotions and you integrate them into a sophisticated reality.
Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology. Among the central concepts of analytical psychology is individuation. And this is the lifelong psychological process of differentiation of the self out of each individual's conscious and unconscious elements. Jung considered it to be the main task of human development. Now, he created some of the best known psychological concepts, including synchronicity, archetypal phenomena, the collective unconscious, the psychological complex, and as well as what we often refer to as extroversion and introversion.
Now, Jung said, so first of all, you unite your mind, your thinking, let's say, with your emotions. So that makes one thing instead of two fighting things. Okay, that's a good one. And then the next conjunction he talked about was, it isn't enough to unite your mind and your emotions. And he thought about that as a male-female pairing symbolically. That's how it would manifest itself sometimes in dreams. So you take the masculine element and the feminine element, the thinking and the emotion, unite those, and that makes you more like one thing. Okay, and now all of a sudden that's represented as symbolically male, that one thing, and it unites with something else that's now represented symbolically female. That's the body. So you take the mind emotion integration and integrate that in your body. So what does that mean? You act it out instead of just thinking. So there's this philosophical idea called a contradiction in action. There's actually a technical term for it, but that's when you think and believe something but you don't act it out.
In psychology, cognitive dissonance occurs when a person holds contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, and is typically experienced as a psychological stress when they participate in an action that goes against one or more of them.
And so that means there's a dissociation in you somehow between your abstract representations and what you manifest in action. Well, that's another form of discontinuity that isn't doing you any good. The driver's going one way and the car's going the other, and you won't even be able to understand yourself if you do that. But even more, you're not putting your principles into practice, so you're dissociated, your being is dissociated. So once you get your mind and your emotions working together, then the next thing to do is to act that out consistently. So that was the second conjunction as far as Jung was concerned. And then the third one was, this is the tough one, and this is the one that's related to phenomenology. You erase the distinction between yourself and the world. That's a tough one.
Now, many people experience dissociation during their life. If you dissociate, you may feel this disconnection from yourself and the world around you. For example, you may feel detached from your body or feel as though the world around you is just, it's like unreal.
So imagine you're dealing with someone who's hoarding. Now, people who are hoarding are often older or neurologically damaged, or they have obsessive compulsive disorder. But then you walk into their house and there's like 10,000 things in their house. There's maybe 100 boxes, and you open up a box, and in the box there's some pens and some old passports and some checks and their collection of silver dollars and some hypodermic needles and some dust and a dead mouse. And there's boxes and boxes and boxes like that in the house. It's absolute chaos in there. Absolute chaos, not order, chaos. And then you think, is that their house or is that their being? Is that their mind? And the answer is, there's no difference. There's no difference.
Hoarding disorder is a persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions because of a perceived need to save them. A person with hoarding disorder experiences distress at the thought of getting rid of the items. Excessive accumulation of items, regardless of their actual value, happens. I know I'm a bit guilty of this. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, features a pattern of unwanted thoughts and fears, which are the obsessions that lead you to do repetitive behaviors, which are the compulsions. These obsessions and compulsions interfere with daily activities, and they also cause significant distress. In short, people with OCD might hoard as a way to neutralize uncomfortable intrusive thoughts. That is, temporarily reduce the amount of those thoughts. Now, it's been estimated that 1 in 4 people with OCD also have compulsive hoarding, and research has shown that 1 in 5 compulsive hoarders have other OCD symptoms.
I could say, well, if you want to organize your psyche, you could start by organizing your room. If that would be easier, maybe you're a more concrete person and you need something concrete to do. So you go clean up under your bed and you make your bed and you organize the papers on your desk, and you think, well, just exactly what are you organizing? Are you organizing the objective world, or are you objecting your field, or are you organizing your field of being, like your field of total experience? And Jung believed that, and I think there's a Buddhist doctrine that's sort of nested in there, that at the highest level of psychological integration, there's no difference between you and what you experience. Now you think, well, I can't control everything I experience, but that's no objection, because you can't control yourself anyway. So the mere fact that you can't extend control over everything you experience is no argument against the idea that you should still treat that as an extension of yourself. Let's say you have a long-standing feud with your brother. Well, is that a psychological problem? Is that him? Is it a problem in the objective world, or is it a problem in your field of being? And it's very useful to think that way, because you might ask, what could you do to improve yourself? Well, let's step one step backwards. The first question might be, why should you even bother improving yourself? And I think the answer to that is something like, so you don't suffer any more stupidly than you have to.
So let us take this further and discuss the psychological integration that Dr. Peterson mentions and how to overcome conflict avoidance. According to Jung, this psychological integration is the process during which both the individual and collective unconscious are integrated into the personality. Now, integration is a positive psychological development that indicates psychological maturity and may help an individual move past these negative habits. Now, the first strategy that I think is important is to evaluate your survival patterns. Now, what experiences from your past may have led to your conflict avoidance? What are you trying to escape when you shy away from confrontation? Becoming aware of your core survival patterns is the first step towards changing them. It's also important to think about the effects of hiding emotions. Try and identify the negative ways that avoiding confrontation can affect your relationships. This can motivate you to speak up and work on developing healthier conflict behaviors. It's also important to think about healthy conflict and how it can benefit you. So discussing your thoughts and feelings openly with your partner or a friend or a family member can create a stronger bond between you and them. You may also find it easier to stand up for yourself in other situations, whether social or even professional. It's also important to reconsider any assumptions you may have about the conflict. The fear of conflict can be incredibly deeply rooted, so this step can be hard. Try to remind yourself that confrontation won't necessarily result in pain and distress. And the more you practice healthy conflict, the less afraid you're likely to be next time. Another important point is to take one step at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day, and overcoming your learned survival patterns is unlikely to be a quick process either. Take it slow and work on one problem at a time. Another one is practice staying calm. Honest and fair communication relies on patience, calmness, and I statements. Instead of casting blame, try to keep your cool and give your perspective calmly. The idea is to become more assertive, not aggressive. You will not feel compelled to run away from conflict, but rather embrace it with confidence. You will deepen trusting relationships, develop new opportunities, and stop spending time and emotional energy avoiding this conflict. Now, I hope this conversation by Dr. Jordan Peterson, as well as my interjections, my little bits and pieces throughout the way, has been helpful. And thanks very much for watching. And if you have found this useful, please leave a comment, like, and also if you haven't already, please subscribe. Thanks very much. Bye for now.